Hey guys, this week's story is from July 1960, Fear magazine. And I couldn't help thinking about an Instagram artist, Temple of Dying Gods. And if you don't know him, look that up. I couldn't help thinking about him while I was reading this. So, alright, pay attention. The Idol by Joe Mackey. Alan Garth hunched on an ottoman in his studio and stared with hypnotic intensity at his masterpiece of grotesquerie. The human-sized ebony carving stared back at him with impassive malignity out of garnet eyes. His concentration was so absolute that he was unaware of the muted Manhattan symphony beyond his walls and of the ebbing light as dusk shadowed the city. The hideous, gleaming idol was, he knew, his greatest work, a creation far surpassing those that had won him a niche in the world of art and brought him wealth enough to roam the byways of the world. He had seen the original in a remote temple in the eastern Ghats of southern India, 12 days' hard journey from Madras. He had lived from moon to moon with the hill tribe before being permitted to enter the sanctum, and when he had dared to try to photograph the idol, his camera had been smashed, and he had barely escaped physical violence. It had taken days more of cajolery plus an offering of many rupees before he had been allowed to make a rough sketch of the idol. Even now he did not know her name. Such knowledge was not for the mind of other than the true believer. He knew only that she was a goddess of men's souls, vengeful and implacable, and that he had become obsessed with translating her fearsome majesty into ebony. Under his scrutiny now was the squat body, the 8 arms outstretched, as if beckoning or offering a gruesome embrace. The demoniac visage surmounted by a headdress containing a cluster of miniature skulls. The finished carving, finished as far as his hands could achieve, seemed all but alive, and now Garth was trying, by sheer force of will, to instill into the core of the midnight wood a living part of himself, of his mind or spirit. His efforts would have elicited a smile or a significant tapping of a forefinger to temple from most civilized men, but as an explorer and anthropologist, Garth had witnessed and even participated in macabre rites and feats. He knew secrets of voodoo and sorcery. He was well versed in the more sophisticated arts of telepathy, hypnotism, and thought transference. And in parts of Africa and Asia, he had seen inanimate objects moved by the power of thought. Garth saw no paradox as he sat in the deepening twilight of his studio in the world's most modern and material metropolis, in using the Kabbalah of Indian cults and Congo witch doctors to try to project a spark of his living consciousness into the craven goddess, to give her more than his artist's tools could provide, and to make her more than a work of art. Even without the added inner spark, the idol, he knew, would give him one of 3 things he'd still desired. At 40, thrice married and thrice divorced, jaded after 2 lusty, roistering decades of feverish pleasure-seeking and equally fanatical works, he wanted just 3 things: lasting fame, a measure of tranquility in the presence of beauty, and Nikki. The ebony goddess would ensure him of the first. Nikki could bring him the second and much more. As these thoughts invaded his contemplation of the goddess, he closed his eyes against her mindless garnet stare, relaxed his rugged bulk, and ran his hand through his blonde, gray-streaked, leonine mane. Nikki, half his age and the daughter of one of his patrons, Lepesky, a mysterious and gaunchly elegant Midas. She was a sprite, an enchanting mixture of naivety and wisdom. He thought of her as quicksilver. Her vitality was boundless, but it did not draw from others. Rather, she seemed to give to them. Aside from her radiance and beauty, he felt that he could somehow regain from her his waning enthusiasm for life. Nikki, though, had kept their relationship on a platonic plane. A short, wry rumble of laughter came from Garth's chest. Women had loved him in a score of capitals and in deserts, mountains, and jungles. And now he was mooning like a juvenile over a virginal elf with a crown of unruly jet hair and Circe's eyes. He sighed, stretched, and resumed his striving for dark rapport with the goddess, becoming so engrossed that he did not hear the first few sprightly knocks on the oaken door of his studio. Then with a start he returned to reality. Nikki, he had invited her to view his masterwork. He swung wide the door, and there she stood, barely reaching his shoulder, her head tilted, a little girl smile on her lips and a woman's smile in her eyes. He took her small white hands in his strong but strangely gentle ones and drew her in. She kissed him fleetingly on the cheek and brushed by. Nikki wrinkled her nose in mock alarm. Old air, no food smells. Has Alan been suffocating himself again and forgetting to eat? Don't scold me, Tinker Bell, he said, smiling fondly down at her. Her eyes roved the room, the walls hung with dozens of masks, paintings, posters, shields, and spears, the corners cluttered with trophies from an atlas full of faraway lands. Garth's workbench, a silent bedlam of knives, brushes, and palettes, and the floor space, hidden by pedestals, busts, carvings in wood and marble and granite. And she shook her head. The gesture said, "You need a woman around the house," but she didn't say it. Garth watched to see her reaction when she first spied the goddess. When she did, suddenly she recoiled a step, and her jaw dropped. Then she went forward gingerly, fascinated, and studied the carving in silence. Finally, she shuddered slightly and turned to Garth. "It's overwhelming, Alan, but so ugly." Afraid she had hurt him, she hurried to him and took his hands. Dear, dear Alan, I know what an honor it is to be asked to be the first to see this, and I only wish I had the knowledge to appreciate it fully. But what I mean is, it makes me uncomfortable. It seems malevolent and almost alive. That's a tribute, you know. I take it that way. She's supposed to be hideous and malevolent and almost alive. He put his hands on her shoulders. Well, don't I get a reward for being a genius? He bent down to kiss her. She brushed his lips lightly and disengaged herself and danced away. You are a genius, she said. Think of me, I know a real, live genius. He smiled. Well, let's sit down and talk about my genius and your adorability. I'll make us some drinks. A frown shadowed her brow. I'm so sorry, Alan, but I have an appointment that I can't possibly break. Those are the easiest kind to break. No, really. And my father's waiting downstairs. Your father? What for? When I told him about the new carving, I couldn't keep him away. He was so excited. Garth scowled. I didn't want anyone else to see it yet, Nikki. She went up to him, looked appealingly into his eyes. Please don't be angry, Alan. It means so much to him. All right, send him up. But will you come again tomorrow? Her eyes became tender and she touched his cheek with her hand. I'll try to come sometime this week. I want a kiss, he said, and none of your sisterly split-second pecks. Nikki let herself be kissed, and when released, stuck out her tongue at him. You're a naughty genius, Mr. Garth, but a nice one. Almost before he knew it, she was gone, with a blown kiss, a smile, and a wave. What a wondrous little being, Garth thought, as he paced the floor. How had such a fellow as Lepesky ever fathered her? Her mother, now dead, must have been a rare and lovely woman. Lepeskus. From somewhere in Central Europe he had come. His accent, now blurred, was difficult to identify, and he was guarded about his origins. Garth was sure he had not begun life with his present fortune. Not that it mattered, but the man had an unctuous, disturbing quality that he was sure was replaced when he dealt with subordinates. Lepescu's knock ended his reverie, and then the man was in the room. He extended his manicured hand and bowed slightly from the waist, and Garth noticed that his suit, although obviously from one of the best tailors, was too tight over his compact frame. Also that Lepescu's curly gray hair was still slicked down with something too oily and fragrant. Maestro, Lepescu said, you do not know what this means to me. When Nikki told me, he wagged an arched forefinger. Why did you not tell old Lepescu, one of your staunchest and earliest supporters? The glittering black eyes darted around the studio, and the wax mustache bristled with excitement. Then Lepescu saw the ebony carving and pattered over to it, making little sounds of delight in his throat and rubbing his hands together. Oh, Maestro, magnificent! Garth studied the goddess, almost unaware of the little man's effusions. She was his masterpiece. When Lepescu's words again impinged on his mind, he was saying, I have 8 Garths, but this makes them look like the work of an amateur. Lepescu smiled silkily and bowed. Not, I hasten to add, that you, as an amateur, do not tower above your professional contemporaries. But this is to Garth what the thinker was to Rodin, what Kneeling Woman was to Lembra. I must have it. Garth smiled grimly. Not this one. But Maestro, I'll pay anything. All your money can't buy this one, Lepescu. This one is my passport to immortality. I'm going to have a one-man show with this as the piece de resistance, then exhibit here and abroad, and finally give it to one of the world's finest museums. Lepescu wrung his hands in frustration and chagrin. But you don't know what this means to me. With it, I have one of the greatest collections. Think what it would do for me. You don't know what it means to me. No, not this time. I wouldn't even have shown it to you except for Nikki. Lepescu regarded him with a wily appraisal. Finally spoke, his tone tinged with victory. I think you will let me have the carving. Garth eyed him, half with hostility, half with amusement. Do you now? Yes, this inanimate woman of exquisite ugliness in return for an animate woman of exquisite loveliness. Garth scowled. What are you talking about? My Nikki. He used a proprietary intonation of my Nikki. Yes, I am an American now, but you undoubtedly know I came from a European country where the father's word is law. I have given Nikki every advantage and every freedom, but in a situation such as this, she would respect and obey my wishes. You mean you'd sell Nikki for my carving? My dear, dear Garth, Americans are such children, and if you will, permit me, great artists are even smaller children. This is not a sale. Nikki's hand in marriage would make you very happy. It would not be a sacrifice for Nikki. She is very devoted to you. She likes and admires you. You can mature these emotions into love, I'm sure. And I would be most elated by such a union. I think you are a great man, and I would be proud to be connected to you by more than my canceled checks. Garth stared unseeingly ahead, stunned by the proposal and at the same time thrilled by it. It wouldn't be taking unfair advantage of Nikki, not really. It would just be helping to make up her mind, still too immature for such vital decisions. And he was certain he could make her happy. Does my offer interest you? Lepescu was prodded. What would happen to my carving? You'd bury it in your house with the rest of your collection? Lepescu pondered, then rubbed his hands. You could have your one-man show. Then for the next, say, 3 years, you could decide when and where it would be exhibited. And on my death, I would will it to a fine museum. Could anything be fairer? It's a compelling offer, Lepescu. My hand on it. Garth ignored the hand and regarded the baleful face of the goddess. At last he spoke. But my statue is not completed yet. Lepescu fairly danced with excitement. No, please do not lay another finger on it. It is perfection as it is. Not another stroke, maestro. I beseech you, you cannot improve on perfection. What I have to do has nothing to do with the exterior of the statue. I do not understand. There are things twixt, Garth said, almost to himself. Then he eyed Lepescu. You do not have to understand. The little man shrugged. As you say, but we have made a bargain? He extended his hand, and Garth shook it. We have made a bargain. He studied the gleaming ebony and garnet eyes. I hope neither of us has occasion to regret it. After Lepescu had left, Garth poured himself a water glass full of brandy and stood silently before the carving for many minutes. At last he lifted the glass in salute. Into his mind came irrelevantly, it seemed, an old Arabic proverb. On ebony and ivory the same dark doom is writ. He drank and smashed the glass. Garth placed an ottoman directly before the goddess and sat looking into her evil face. You are my greatest achievement, goddess of men's souls, he whispered. I am giving you into the hands of strangers because I am mortal, weak. But I have poured so much of myself into your creation that we shall always have an affinity. And before I surrender you, I wish to give you a final gift, a living part of my mind or spirit. Through the night hours, Garth sat before the black figure, straining with all of his being to project an iota of his consciousness into its core. As the hours dragged by and his muscles became cramped and his mind wearied, he stimulated himself with gulps from the bottle. At times, doubts assailed him. Was what he was trying to do utterly impossible? Was he a fool, a fanatic, a madman? Had his exposure to weird rites in many lands unbalanced him? Garth banished the doubts, and then they returned, and he fought them down again. In the small, silent hours, when he was nearly exhausted and ready to give up, he became aware of an almost tangible flow of his brainwaves into the soulless carving. Then, with a thrill of horror, he felt that his thoughts were meeting receptivity in the wood. imparting to it a primitive sort of consciousness, setting up a counter reaction in which he felt a flow of something from the statue to him. Was this self-hypnotism, insanity, or just exhaustion? The flow became stronger, and Garth found himself unable to look away. When Dawn's fingers brushed Night out of the studio, Garth was slumped within the encircling arms of the goddess, his eyes clouded with the film of death. Her eyes glowed with a malignant luminosity that could not have been provided by mere garnets. All right, and here's a ghost account from Ghost Stories Magazine, October 1926. In Terror of Laughing Clay. I whistled softly as I read the name on the card. I had met John Ralston several times, but never on a friendly footing, for his antagonism to anything pertaining to occultism extended to those who affected any interest in the subject. He was prepared to back his opinion on ghosts with a standing offer of $10,000 to anyone who could convince him that there was anything more than fake and trickery in the phenomena of the supernatural. And no one had ever won the $10,000. I have devoted myself to a study of those occult occurrences, and apparently mysterious and in most instances not to be explained, but which I am convinced we shall in time discover to be natural in their operation. In fact, what started as a hobby of an amateur has developed into a profession, and I am called upon to investigate many instances of so-called hauntings. The name of Mark Shadow is familiar to research societies both here and in Europe, though no doubt most of you read it here for the first time. I was surprised to get Ralston's card as I sat in the study of my little house in West 11th Street. He was the last man likely to call on me, and I was puzzled as to what could have brought him, but I told my secretary to show him in at once. Ralston strode in, aggressive, heavy of tread, only his manner lacked something of its usual arrogance. "I dare say you're surprised to see me, Mr. Shadow," he said brusquely. "In fact, I'm surprised myself, but once started on the dumb fool business, I decided to go on. Are you busy now?" "Not particularly," I said. "You don't want to consult me professionally?" "We've had several tilts in the past, Shadow," he answered with forced familiarity, "but forget that. You're the sanest of the crew. That's why I picked you to hear my story." Much obliged," I said with a grin. "What's your trouble?" "I want a plain talk with you, as man to man. You can charge what you want, so long as you can solve a problem or two to my satisfaction." He drew out a checkbook and bent forward on my desk. "No hurry," I said curtly. The man had an unfortunate method of approach. "Time enough for that, Mr. Ralston. Any advice I give you is at your service, though judging from the past, I fear it won't be appreciated." "Oh, I know," he answered, taken aback. "But we'll let bygones be bygones. This is too serious of a matter for quibbling over opinions. I don't retreat one step from my convictions, but I own I'm puzzled to death. There's some trickery going on in my home, and I want to get at the bottom of it." "Serious, huh?" "So serious that my wife's a nervous wreck. I've had to dismiss my servants, close up my home and come to town. The house is new. I only moved in last year, and I don't know if I'll ever get my wife to set foot in it again. She wanted me to consult her cousin Carver. You don't mean Professor Joseph Carver? The same damned opinionated, self-deluded fool talking about ghosts. There are no ghosts. It amazed me to hear the name of Carver, a cranky dabbler in dark matters that are best left alone, even by those well-informed in them. What's the matter with the house? I asked. I want you to find out, Shadow. There's something in it that's making it impossible to live in. It's nothing supernatural. Don't get that idea in your head. Then why come to me? Why not get a detective? He gave us a snort of contempt. I've had 3 of them already. 2 of them couldn't find a thing. The third lit out in the middle of the night and sent me a crazy note saying he could stand up against anything he saw, but not against something out of hell. Now I want you to come out and see what sort of a trick is being played on me. You believe the house is haunted? I believe nothing of the sort, he retorted. Someone is trying to put something over on me. Somebody's after my $10,000 offer, though how they got in to rig up their contrivances beats me. I'll give you a free hand. You can go as far as you like. I hesitated. I foresaw, notwithstanding this offer, and whatever I did, I would have a wholly unsympathetic assistant. Ralston leaned forward. See here, Shadow. Ever since you exposed that medium in Vienna, I have had respect for your judgment. You have some critical faculty, more than I can say for most of them. If there's trickery, you'll find it. If there's anything more, I'll listen to what you have to say. Now will you take the case? If you would be more explicit, I was still hesitating. I'll tell you all you want to hear after you're on the ground. I'd like to see if you can get an inkling yourself first. Oh, very well. I'll wait till we're on the spot. You'll come then? He said, standing up with an evident air of relief. Yes. Good. There's a train at Grand Central 5:10. Will that suit you? Bring a bag with you. I met him at the station with my bag and in my pocket a flashlight and an automatic. Oh, shit. Okay, sorry. Fuck. I fucked myself up. Oh my god. Alright. We got out at Green Farms and walked a few hundred yards to a pretentious house on the shore of the Sound, set deep in its grounds and bordered on either side by other miniature estates. He unlocked the front door and switched on the lights as we entered a wide hall with walls of wood paneling. We'll have a bite to eat in the dining room, he said. I brought a lunch basket with me. Hang your things up on the rack there while I start the percolator. He went into the dining room and I heard a clatter of plates and cutlery. I walked towards the lighted door, and as I did so, I halted with a decided sensation of shrinking. I looked about me sharply and found I was standing opposite a large chest of some dark wood. Oh, fuck. What was the last word? Prompted by an impulse, I raised the heavy lid and peered inside. It was empty, but from it came a curious damp odor, almost like that of moist earth or clay. I let the lid fall with a start. Did you laugh, Ralston? I asked sharply. There was no reply, and I took a couple of strides into the dining room. As I did so, Ralston came from the kitchen beyond with a tray. Did you laugh, Ralston? I repeated. He flashed a mirthless glance at me. "No," he said curtly. "So you heard it, did you? Quick work." "I heard a laugh, muffled," I confessed, "but a laugh." "Near the old chest?" "Yes." "A mocking, snickering laugh?" "Yes, that describes it exactly." "You've started well, Shadow," he said as he laid the tray on the table. "Here, have some, won't you?" He poured a glass out for him and gulped it down. "Thanks. I prefer to keep my head clear." "Oh, all right. What's your idea?" "Something to do with the chest, some sort of radio attachment, though I've examined every inch of the chest and the woodwork of the hall." I said nothing till we sat down. "Where did you get the chest?" "Came from some old house around here. My wife picked it up." "I'd like to know its history." He made a gesture of impatience. "No offense, Shadow, but don't pull any stuff about old furniture retaining the atmosphere of some dark crime. The thing does exist, for all you profess not to believe in it," I said firmly. "However, I promise you I won't let that theory stand in the way of investigation. I have a feeling that the mystery starts from the chest. But if you don't mind, I'm ready to hear your account of what has been going on." "I'll give it to you without any frills, just a plain, bald statement of the facts," he answered. "The business began 2 weeks ago. My wife and I were sitting in that room across the hall, her drawing room. It was about 10:30 at night, and we were waiting for the maid to bring us some ginger ale. All at once we heard her shriek in the hall. Smash went the tray, and she dived in here in hysteric. Swore that as she was passing the chest, the lid went up of its own accord and something looked at her. Something hideous with staring eyes. She couldn't describe it. She gave a squawk and the lid dropped down and she bolted to us screaming. I gave her a piece of my mind, dragged her out in the hall, opened the chest and showed her it was empty. But it was no use. She stuck to her story, much to my wife's amazement. Hilda had been so reliable. German girl? No, Swedish and solid as they make 'em. Good servant, too. That finished her. She left next day, though my wife foolishly offered to increase her wages. That night, I went up to bed. I heard the laugh. I thought the butler was responsible. I could have given Ralston an explanation of sorts there and then, but I knew it would be useless. The man would have to be convinced by some other method. "I'd like to look into the matter myself," I said. "Suppose I sit up and keep watch tonight, Ralston. I think I noticed a billiard table in the room as we came in. We'll play a game or two, and then you can go off to bed while I hold the fort. I'd just as soon be alone." "Well, it's your party, I guess." "All right, we'll go to my den, Shadow." We played several games, and then Ralston left me to my own devices. I extinguished the lights in the hall, all but one dim just over the beginning of the staircase, moved an easy chair to the doorway of the den, and sat down where I could keep my eye on the chest. I saw that my flashlight was in order and that I had a cartridge up in the automatic chamber. Like, damn, like ghost hunting with guns. Interesting. All right, sorry. I lit a pipe and sat, half dozing. It was about 1:30 by a tall grandfather's clock when I received my first signal of warning. That prompting of an inward voice which says, "Be wary, be ready." There was a faint sound, like the insistent trickling of water, and almost before I could fully realize the sight, the lid of the chest rose swiftly, hung for an instant, then closed again noiselessly. Whatever had been within was now at large in the silence of the night. The trickling sound had ceased. I could hear nothing but the ticking of the clock and my own breathing. I was aware, however, of a new odor in my nostrils, that of earth, dampened earth or clay, and the skin of cheeks and brow cooled as though a mist-laden breeze had wafted towards them. I sat staring, concentrated, alert. It seemed to me that a shadow upon the wood panels was expanding into monstrous swollen shape, roughly that of a man, or rather a huge gorilla. I kept my attention fixed upon this, for there is more lurking in the shadow than the ordinary man suspects, and well it is for the peace of mind that this is so. It is too often the concealing vehicle of an aspect of horror. But before I could form any definite opinion, this shadow disengaged itself from the wall. In a flash it had passed me, and with grotesque but formidable rapidity was upon the wall of the staircase. It vanished. I sprang from my chair and followed. I fumbled for a switch by the door. But quick as I was, the thing that went before me was quicker. I heard Ralston shout my name, and then his voice thinned to a shrill squeak, like that of a hunted rabbit. I reached the landing in a leap, and guided by the choking sound coming from one of the several open doors, darted forward. At that instant there fell on my ears a voice which, with a sensation of utter bewilderment, I recognized. It was the voice of Professor Carver, saying in low and perfectly audible tones, "Which of us is right now, Ralston?" Some heavy object landed at my feet, as though flung by a gigantic hand. I was hurled against the jamb of the door by the rustling contact of an unwieldy mass. I felt it, but it was wholly invisible. For an instant I fumbled for the switch, gasping for breath. Then the light glowed in the bulbs. The room was empty but for Ralston. As I bent over him, thinking him dead, he groaned, then stumbled up to his feet, clawing at his throat. "My God, that you, Shadow? Did you stop him? See there, this is murder. Murder, no less. Caught me by the throat and slung me to the floor." "Do you mean Carver?" I asked gravely. "Yes, couldn't see him, but I felt him, heard him. Did you hear him?" "Yes, but you're mistaken in thinking Carver was just here in person. I'm going to tell you something, believe it or not, as you will. I'm afraid Carver, in order to convince you of the truth of something you denied, has projected himself into the shell of some vile thing he has materialized. Please answer me one question. At any time did you have an argument with Carver on his pet subject?" "The last time Carver was here," said Ralston reluctantly, "had to invite him occasionally on account of the relationship. The fellow had the blatant rudeness to try and thrust his opinions down my throat at my own dinner table. I got pretty hot under the collar, and well, if it hadn't been for my wife's presence, he had never quite gotten over her taking me instead of him. I swear to God I'd have smashed his smirking face in. As it was, he wouldn't stay overnight, as had been arranged. He went off livid and with fury." "Then, if Carver is your enemy, Ralston, there's no time to lose. You're in danger so hideous that it will scarcely bear contemplation. We're dealing with an elemental, a destroying force so terrible under the influence of a revengeful man that there is no safety for either of us now until it is cast back in the darkness from which it was summoned. We must see Carver at once and bring him to his senses. Can we get a car at this hour?" "I have a car in the garage still," answered Ralston, keeping his eyes on my face like a frightened child. "I can't believe it. I can't drive, Shadow. I'm all shot to pieces." "I'll drive," I told him. "We'll start now. Every minute is precious." Carver has an old house a mile this side of Darien and well off the main road. When we drove up there, was a light in the window of a lower room through which the shade was drawn. I knocked loudly at the door without getting any response. "That's odd," said Ralston into my ear. "He used to have a servant. Carver must hear us. There's a light in that room." We went around to the back door. I tried the handle softly and was surprised to find the door was unlocked. We passed through the kitchen into the dark little hall. I called Carver's name several times. At the last summons, there sounded behind us a mocking chuckle, and I had just time to shout a warning to Ralston when the thing was upon us, returned to the house of its birth. An enormous, impalpable, but invisible something filled the narrow passageway. I had the sensation of being overwhelmed by a mass of mud which flowed on and over me, leaving me gasping. Behind me I heard Ralston splutter, and then, just as I thought I had reached the limit of my endurance, a door against which my back was pressed opened. The strain, and I was toppled inside. I was in the room in which burned the light. I sprang to my feet, drew my automatic, and looked sharply about me. Carver was not to be seen. Ralston stumbled in, gasping, and caught my arm. "My God, it's the hellish thing of the chest," he exclaimed. We both stood staring at the extraordinary object on the table. Upon a wooden table was a grotesque little mannequin of yellow clay, into the head of which were stuck two bits of looking-glass eyes. Over its head was a funnel, in which was a piece of sponge, apparently kept moist by the fluid which trickled to it through a pipe arrangement. Once in a while a drop would fall on the figure. The miniature, the model of the thing he materialized into the abominable and hellish enlargement we encountered, I said. As he made no reply, I turned my head. He was staring out into the hall. I laid my hands gently on his arm, and as I did so, he let out an appalling shriek. "It's coming again." I turned my gaze sharply to the door. Against the darkness of the hall were two monstrous eyes, phosphorescent with a strangely dead gleam. I had a momentary glimpse of a large form, shapeless but repulsively reminiscent of the hideous image on the table. And quick as a flash, I leveled my automatic, not at the menacing shape invading the room, but at its material representation on the table. With my shot, the image spattered to its original clay. But the horrors of the night were not yet exhausted. As the shot rang through the room, from behind a closed door nearby came an inhuman screech. The door was slowly swinging open. Exposed to our fascinated gaze was an object so ghastly that I was surprised to feel my skin creeping with horror. Within the closet hung a dangling thing, a rope about its neck, the corpse of Carver. His toes swayed a few inches above the overturned stool. It was plain to see to what disastrous end the intensity of evil concentration had led. He had taken his own life. I heard Ralston whisper, "Dead while his spirit came and went in that abominable shape." I set my teeth grimly and went forward. The body was stone cold. Carver had been dead for days. I turned sharply. Ralston, his hands before his face to shut out the hideous spectacle, was stumbling like a blind man to the door. I dragged him out of that unholy house, helped him into the car, and turned its bonnet toward New York and sanity. 2 days later, I received a tacit admission that Ralston had experienced a change of conviction. Enclosed in an envelope was his check for $10,000. Okay, and now for like a little local, this is from the Washington Post. It's a good story. It kind of clears up the local Black Aggie legend. Did Felix Angus contemplate the great beyond as he lay wounded on a Civil War battlefield? Did Marian Adams known to her friends in Washington society as Clover, pondered the other side as she lifted a beaker of potassium cyanide to her lips. Answer Man supposes they did. They probably never met one another, but they are forever linked thanks to two bronze statues. Clover Adams was the wife of Henry Adams, grandson and great-grandson of presidents. The two were fixtures in 19th century Washington, hosting a lively salon at their home on Lafayette Square. But Clover was given to fits of depression, and it was in just such a slough of despond in 1885 that she took her life. Drinking chemicals that she used in her photography hobby. She was 42. Henry was bereft. To memorialize Clover, he turned to one of America's greatest sculptors, Augustus St. Gaudens. Henry had become fascinated by Eastern religion, and as art historian Cynthia J. Miles recounted in her 2000 article in the American Art Journal, he asked the sculptor to design an ideal figure embodying ideas similar to the Buddhist concept of nirvana, release from the cycles of life and death, desire and pain, an extinction of the passions leading to the inner quietude. The artist created a moody and evocative draped figure for Clover's grave at Rock Creek Cemetery. The sculpture has no title. Adams resisted such simple names as grief, and it is known as the Adams Memorial. The artwork became a sensation. People clamored for copies, but Adams wanted to keep his mourning private and refused nearly all entreaties. And now we come to Felix Angus. He was born in France in 1839 and lived a life right out of a boy's adventure book. He ditched college for work as a seaman, circling the globe under sail. After his return to France, he trained as a sculptor, then abandoned that to become a soldier in the Austrian War. He immigrated to the United States, where he worked briefly as a worker for the jewelry maker Tiffany & Company, before volunteering for service in the cause of the Union. Angus entered the Federal Army as a sergeant. He left 4 years later as a brigadier general, his body so full of shrapnel that he supposedly clanked when he walked. Twice wounded, he spent one convalescence in the home of Baltimore newspaper publisher Charles C. Fulton. He fell in love with his nurse, Fulton's daughter, Annie, and married her. When his father-in-law died, Angus became publisher of the Baltimore American and then launched the evening Baltimore Star. Angus wanted to leave as big a mark in death as he had in life. He purchased a family plot in Druid Ridge Cemetery in Pikesville, Maryland, and looked for the perfect monument to adorn it. Fortuitously, a dealer said he had been authorized to furnish life-size duplicates of the Adams Memorial. Angus's copy was erected in 1907. He shipped his mother's body over from France and buried her under it, but the dealer was lying. The Angus Memorial was a copy, codged from the original by a sculptor named Edward L.A. Posh, heretofore best known for making President McKinley's death mask. When St. Gaudens' widow, Augusta, learned of the unauthorized duplicate, she threatened legal action. But she was unable to persuade Angus to remove the bronze copy. He was buried next to it in 1925. Answer Man will not speculate on how Baltimoreans treat their cemeteries as compared with Washingtonians, but it is a fact that over the years the Angus Memorial became covered in graffiti. It got the nickname Black Aggie and was the subject of superstitious folklore. It was said that a witch was buried underneath. The eyes of the figure were said to glow red. Jump in its lap at midnight, and you would die within 2 weeks. In 1967, the Angus family, believing it to be a St. Gaudens approved replica, donated the work to the Smithsonian. When it was determined to be a knockoff, It was given to the General Services Administration, which in 1987 moved it to the courtyard of the National Courts Building on the east side of Lafayette Square. And that's where it is today, not far from where Clover struggled with her demons and lost.